So, whenever you're ready, team, you can start.
All right, so we're the Berman Hebrew Academy Move Beitin team, and we're about to make the case that Rachel Rubenstein is chayav to pay the damages in their entirety, saying as she is the main damager.
Jaywalking is similar to someone who carelessly throws a rock out of their house, because even if someone didn't intend to injure someone when they throw a rock out of their house, their negligence still caused the injury. So there is a basic obligation to follow the traffic laws because they're in place for a reason, which is to prevent accidents such as these. And the pedestrian's negligence by jaywalking, even if they didn't intend to cause the accident, made it caused a higher risk of something like this occurring. One can be made responsible for damage if they acted physically in a way that caused the damage. So by jaywalking and moving into the path of Rachel Rubenstein's car, the pedestrian caused the accident to occur. So we can't find the pedestrian, but in a pikuach nefesh situation during which someone's life is saved at the expense of someone else, the person at which their expense the life was saved must be reimbursed. And because Rachel Rubenstein is the owner of the car and the one who initially turned it on, she is responsible to pay for the damages.
Now that we've determined that Ms. Rubenstein is the one who caused the damage, we have to determine whether she caused the damage directly or it was the car that damaged the Shimon Shalom. Because depending whether she damaged or her car damaged, there are different types of payments. If we determine that Ms. Rubenstein damaged, then she would be assessed according to the 5 payments of damages, which are damage, suffering, healing, lost days of work, and shame. And damage includes property damage and body damage, and even the devaluation of the property. So we would assess the different categories, and that's extrapolated from Bava Kama, Pegim Lamed Bet. And one could say another proof for why Ms. Rubenstein might be liable for direct damage and not her car damaging is because it is similar to a case where one goes to sleep and they're aware of the possibility of causing damage in their sleep. If they cause damage in their sleep, they have to pay the damages. So one could say that it is like Ms. Rubenstein, who upon entering her car knew that she might cause damage. So even if it's misguided damage and not deliberate, she will have to pay. If we determine that the car is a source of damage, there are 2 different categories of property damages, which the first being fire, caused by an external force, and the second being ox or pit damage, which is damage done by an animal, to which only damage and shame are applicable categories of damage.
The Rush says that if someone's animal causes damage to another animal, then the owner, who originally caused their animal to move by hitting it, for example, would be responsible for the damages. Similarly, Ms. Rubenstein, who originally turned on her car and consequently caused the car to move, is responsible for the damages. And there's an analogy with arrows, where if somebody shoots arrows and the arrows cause damage, then the fault is not the fault of the arrows themselves or the person who made the arrows, it's the fault of the person who shot the arrows. Similarly, Ms. Rubenstein, who caused her car to move, is responsible for her car's damage.
So when assessing cases like ours, it's important to know that there are 3 main principal damage categories, right? One of them being guf, tzrorot, and koach. By the way, taken from Bava Kama Yud Zayin Amud Bet, 17b. So guf is when the body of the cow or the ox directly damaged. It's like a punch or a kick, so physically with the body. And tzrorot is like small pebbles being kicked, but it's important to note that it's indirect. So tzrorot and koach is chetzina, is like half of the damage. So here, the pebble is breaking something, or in koach, the wagon is hitting something and breaking it. So it's important to denote which category specifically it is in order to make the assessment of the damage payments. Okay, so what is ours? So first, let's establish that it is guf, right? We're saying that she is the entity, she's the one who's turning on the car, and therefore she's the one who's making it possible. So we are saying that it is guf. And so therefore, since guf is nezek shalem, not chatzi nezek like tzroret and koach are, it would be a case of nezek shalem. And here's a Gemara from Baba Kama, that actual Gemara. I'm not going to read it now, but I'm going to have the key points in the next slide. This is, so there's a case if a chicken hits something with its wings without flying, just hits it with its wings. So that would be a case of guf, right? So the guf, the body of the chicken is hitting something, and it is nezek shalem, but there is a minority opinion of a Tana named Sumchus who says that it is chatzi nezek. But if the chicken spreads its wings and the wind generated by the wings causes it to break, it is indirect, a case of koach, which would be chatzi nezek. And then, of course, Sumchus has the minority opinion, but we don't follow him for halacha.
Nothing comes before saving a life, so that includes damage. Damage does not come before saving a life. So this situation was a pikuach nefesh situation. If the car hadn't swerved and had hit the pedestrian at the speed at which it was going, the pedestrian probably would have been killed on impact. If there had been enough time to slow down, enough that the pedestrian wouldn't have been killed, then that's what the car's algorithm would have determined to do. But there wasn't enough time, so the car didn't do that. Swerving was the only way that all the fatalities would be prevented. So because the programming of the car made the correct halachic decision, Aliva Industries is not responsible to pay for the damages. Our final ruling is that Rachel Rubenstein must compensate Shimon Shalom for his hospital stay, his missed wages, and the damages to his car because she owns the car and is the one who initially turned it on.
Okay,
All done.
thank you for this, Christine. The judges now have 9 minutes for questions.
Sure. I'd like to look a little bit at or ask you to explain in a little more detail on the shift from responsibility. In that you seem to be holding that the pedestrian is in fact responsible for this accident, and then holding Rachel Rubenstein responsible for paying a great deal of damage for an accident that you actually hold she's not the primary responsible for.
Right, so
Just because you feel the damages must be paid. I'd like for you to explain in a little more detail how you're making that transition,
Right, so-
moving 100% of the fault.
In a pikuach nefesh situation in which a life is saved but at the expense of someone else, that person must be repaid. So had Rachel Rubenstein's car not swerved, the pedestrian would have been killed. So and she swerved into Shimon Shalom's car, so the pedestrian's life was saved at the expense of Shimon Shalom. Now the pedestrian should be responsible and should need to pay for it, but we can't find him and therefore can't make him pay. Because the pedestrian cannot be located and Rachel Rubenstein is the one whose car actually swerved, and she's the one who turned on the car, making her responsible for its subsequent actions, she is responsible to pay for the damages.
Is this a unique case to Pikuach Nefesh because the pedestrian's life was saved?
Yes.
In other words, is the argument that because this is a case of Pikuach Nefesh, this is a unique case that someone must pay even if they're not primarily responsible?
Yes.
In addition to what Shifra said, we also had we had the idea of whether it's a direct or an indirect damage, right? So one could say that the pedestrian was the catalyst for everything that happened, but in the end of the day, the pedestrian didn't do anything. The pedestrian was just there. So we would say that the pedestrian was indirect and the car actually did the damage. So even if you want to assess what the pedestrian did, you can't go as far as saying that he was the direct damager, because he was only, at worst, he was only tzroet or koach. He was definitely not goof because he didn't use his physical body to do anything.
Is it possible then to argue that Rachel Rubenstein is also, the damage is indirect? That is, she happened to own the car, but she merely...
She didn't, but she turned it on. So when she turned on the car, that made her responsible for its subsequent actions, because just like when someone whips a horse and it moves, if the horse then damages something while it's moving, they're the one who put the horse into motion in the first place.
That's true. We're comparing the car to a horse. If someone's riding a horse and the horse, or the ox actually, and that's the case the Gemara brings, the ox hits something, it is still goof. So we're just equating the car with an ox.
How about the case of fire?
So, it's not caused by an external force because she was the one who turned it on, and so when she turned it on, it was like her doing it. She knew she was doing it. It was active.
So is it like shooting the bow and arrow?
Yeah.
More like shooting the bow and arrow, or more like the ox?
Well, with the two situations, the point was that someone did a small action, and the damage happened as a result of that. So, in both cases, it would just be to show how Ms. Rubenstein is liable when she just turned the car on.
Essentially, it's both cases.
That it's similar to both?
Yeah.
Right.
I'd like you to explain one text to me in a little more detail, since
Sure.
you've had a little more time with them than I have. In this critical case you have, where the rider of the horse is responsible for the damages the horse did.
Sure.
To my recollection, there was a secondary action, that is, the horse was in motion, and then the rider spurred it to go faster, and that in the spurring of the horse, damage was done, it ran into something or bit something. There was a secondary action.
So-
That is,
Like an outside impetus.
or even the driver, so if I was driving down the road and then I swerved the wheel, it's my secondary action. It wasn't turning on the car that caused the damage, it was the swerve. In this case, since there was no secondary action, and maybe I'm not clear on the source, which is why I'm asking
From
for
our
it.
understanding of the source, there was no secondary action. Once the owner whipped the horse, they no longer did anything to control the horse.
And hypothetically, this wasn't really discussed in your case, but I'm just wondering, is it possible that a car can drive 2 miles an hour and avoid all damage?
Well,
Did somebody make a decision to drive 35 miles an hour?
Well, you can't, like, there's a speed limit in general doesn't mean that a speed limit isn't only not to go faster, it's also to remain, you can get a speeding ticket for going too slowly. So if you drive, it can be dangerous to drive slowly too, because if you drive slowly and everyone else is driving faster, you're going to cause a crash either way. So if you don't follow the regulations that are set in place, it's not necessarily safer to go slower.
So at that point, you'd be causing it indirectly, which might save you a lot of money.
Perhaps that's negligence as well. That's also pshia,
Right.
as Schiffer said in the beginning of the PowerPoint.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.